What is the kingdom of heaven like? It's a question I posed last Sunday. And then I suggested that the kingdom of heaven has two plot lines running simultaneously. You remember? Some of you? Okay, I'll review. One that is told from my perspective or from your perspective, right? About our particular context at any given moment in time. That's one, from my perspective or your perspective. And the second is the story of all time and all place and all space and all past and all future that washes through all things. The second plot line is the narrative of God, within which sits everything. And so, to consider the kingdom of heaven is to be continuously discerning multiple plot lines. Ours, which is bound within the material and the temporal, filled with tasks and stuff, and God's, which is spiritual and eternal, woven through with love. Okay? That's a review from last Sunday. I also suggested last week that our attention is often drawn to this second plot line when we come up against something that provokes tension in us, like in Gathering Sunday. Or more to the point, the gospel today. At least it did for me. Let me recap. There is a landowner, and he's going away for a long time. And before he goes, he assigns 3 different people tasks, and he resources them according to their capacity. 1, he gives 5 talents. 1, he gives 2 talents. And 1, he gives 1 talent. Now, eventually, this landowner returns, and he asks the 5 talent and the 2 talent characters how things went. And by evidence of their productivity, it seems things went well. The landowner rewards them by saying, "Well done, good and trustworthy servant. And then, you have been trustworthy with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into your master's joy." See, he rewards them first with words of admiration and connection. And then he assigns them more responsibility with the intent of bringing them more fully into his joy. Okay. So remember many years ago, I was talking to a parishioner about this very passage. And she said to me, "The last thing that I want when I die is more work." She said that is no joy at all. Good point. Good point. If the work being referenced in this parable is about tasks and stuff. Right? To read this parable within the framework of the temporal and material would indicate that Jesus believes that those with stuff should have more stuff, and those without much stuff should get even less stuff. And that doesn't sound very much like the Jesus we talk about here at Epiphany, does it? No. Give me a resounding no so they can hear it online. No. Right, so then when I read this, it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder, what is this about? What's going on here? What am I missing? Is there a second plot line that I'm not clearly seeing? And so I read the parable again. This is what we do when we study Scripture. We come up to some tension. We read the parable again, and then I read it again, and I read it again, and the word that kept coming up off the paper for me was the word joy. And that provoked me to ask the question, what do I think about joy? What brings me joy? And that was a wonderful opportunity to reflect. And my mind cast back to this past summer, where Desmond, my son, and I spent a few days digging out invasive bamboo in our backyard. There was no joy in that, nor much success. But what brought me joy was sitting with him on the porch at the end of the day, drinking a beer, surveying our work, talking with him about it. That brought me a ton of joy. What brings me joy is singing hymns in this place with all of you, loudly, because the acoustics allows me not to hear myself well. I know you can hear me, but I can't hear myself, if you were wondering. And that brings me joy. Brings me joy to teach classes and to preach sermons that I've worked hard on with you in mind. It brings me joy. So I wonder, what brings you joy? Can you remember a time when you entered into the Master's joy? It's a spiritual realm. The Master's joy, it's an eternal realm. Within the second plot line of God's narrative, rewards are never burdens. In the kingdom of heaven, 10 talents of joy is easier to carry than 5 talents. And those who experience joy tend to experience more joy. And those who don't seek joy or are unaccustomed to considering joy seem to have less joy. See, the kingdom of heaven is bigger than the temporal and the material. And that is the point missed by the 1 talent wonder. Like, he perceived the value of the talent as one might perceive a gold bar, or a fancy car, or fine art. Something that needed to be protected, something that needed to be sort of cloistered, packed away, so it retained its inherent value. So he takes it, he buries it in the ground. He buries it like he'd bury a body. And then he goes about doing his life. Goes about doing his life, living out his own plot line as if it were the only plot line. But the complicated thing about living one's own plot line as if it were the only plot line is that it reveals an infinite number of plot lines that seek the same stuff in the same amount of time, which is exhausting. Living a continuous state of either gaining ground or losing ground in a world of limited resources, and always towards the same end, always towards the end of losing everything. Because at the end of the day, we leave this world with nothing at all. We start at birth, signed our talents, if you will, within God's narrative plot line, and we finish exiting that stage all by ourselves towards God, the director, in hope of hearing, "Well done, good and trustworthy servant. Enter your master's joy." That's the beginning, and that's the end. By ourselves and by ourselves, with God and with God. And in between, we play out our personal plot line, either bearing our talents and the obligation of stuff and tasks as priority number 1, or setting the priority as seeking the master's joy. Now, these aren't quite either or, because we do have tasks to do, don't we? And we do have stuff to manage, don't we? We must, that's right. But what it does mean, the question that is asked, is, are we hearing 2 plot lines or just our own plot line? Jesus has some advice on this, incidentally. He says, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consume nor thieves break in and steal." Have you heard that before? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The tyranny of tasks and stuff can mute, obscure, even extinguish our capacity to hear the narrative plot line of God. Which is why our forebears developed the spiritual exercises to enhance our capacity to simultaneously hear two plot lines. And so, to push back against the tyranny of too many tasks, the spiritual exercise of Sabbath was developed. And to push back against the tyranny of too much stuff, the spiritual exercise of the tithe was developed. And the interesting thing is that every single significant religious organization that has ever developed and had staying power over time has discovered and then practiced the spiritual exercise of Sabbath or something like it, and the spiritual exercise of the tithe or something like it. And it's for this reason that we at Epiphany are called to these practices as well. Okay? Today's Ingathering Sunday, which is the day annually that we make our tithe to the church. Tithe can be a perilous word to say from the pulpit. For some reason, talking about money can provoke peevishness or defensiveness. But the point of the tithe is not money and the pride or shame it can tweak. The point of the tithe is joy. It's about hearing or seeking to hear the words, "Well done, good and trustworthy servant." And the key word in that is trustworthy. Trust, that we can trust God. Right? The tithe is this idea of relinquishing us from fear and anxiety or pride and autonomy that money can provoke. The tithe seeks to liberate us from that into the Master's joy. Okay? You tracking? Okay. Now, occasionally I am asked, very occasionally, how much should a tithe be? And my response to that is, let me review your portfolio and I'll get back to you. Oddly, nobody's taken me up on that. Although there are religious institutions that do that. But in truth, the tithe is about the right tithe, or in truth, the tithe is the amount given away that unburdens us from the self-centered materialism of our life, right? The tithe is about the lilies of the field that Jesus talks about, right? The tithe is the thing that liberates us from that deep and anxious worry that can be provoked by money. Now, for some, the tithe could be given away 90% of your net income. There are some people who could live handsomely on just 10% of the amount that they actually take in. And I've heard of people doing this. The poster child for this is John Wesley. John Wesley, young Anglican priest in England, when he was graduating from seminary, he decided at that time how much money he needed to live the standard of life that he wanted to live. And then he made the commitment to give everything else away. And by the time he died, while his standard of living went up a little bit, he had become the largest philanthropist in England. But more importantly, and more to the point, he was a person filled with joy. For some, a tithe may be 10% of their net income. For some, it may be $1 or $10 a month. The amount isn't the point. The point is throwing off the tyranny of the material. The point is to take a stand. Right? The point is to trust God. The point is to say yes to joy. The point of the tithe is to infuse joy into our spiritual journey. The tithe is a thanksgiving for how our plot line, the plot line of our lives, is so thoroughly and wonderfully designed to sit within the narrative of God. Now, the tithe also has a practical benefit. It supports institutions that talk about these two plot lines and how God's love runs through every single person's life. That is, every single person. This is why the tithe is oriented towards this place, the church. And while many, if not most of us, donate to other causes that resonate within our personal plot line, I remind you that the church does one thing that other institutions do not do. It is designed to help us understand and experience the Master's joy. That is why we exist. And Epiphany flourishes because this entire community steps up, this whole community steps up each year to make a pledge. Every single pledge matters, every single one, no matter the amount. It's what our community does. And we accumulate together to support the talents of this parish. You are what allow this parish to be what it is. Thank you for that. Because a flourishing Epiphany enhances our ability to carry this message of joy to the city of Seattle. To bring joy into people's lives who are isolated or encumbered by too many things. To bring joy to people who bury their talents in the ground, running from death rather than seeking the light of life, the second plot line. So thank you for your pledge. Thank you for your faithfulness to this church. Well done, good and trustworthy servants. Enter into the Master's joy.